Hi, my name's Ray Poynter, and I'm going to be giving you a really quick introduction to ethnography. So, first of all, where do we locate ethnography? If you think about everything that we do to study people in a social context, we can divide that into two parts. There's quantitative and there's qualitative. And actually, there's almost no overlap between the two, but that's a discussion for another time. What about ethnography? Ethnography lies entirely within qualitative. You can do quantitative studies as part of the collection of data for an ethnography. You can do it alongside an ethnography. You can do it after an ethnography. But ethnography lies entirely within the qualitative domain. Ethnography is all about the lived experience. I want to highlight this with a project that I did last year as part of a postgraduate course I was taking part in. And I was hanging out in different Starbucks in Nottingham looking at queuing behaviour. I was queuing myself, I was ordering drinks, I was spending time sitting down, writing up my notes, observing and understanding what the lived experience is. How do people in the real world go about queuing? What is queuing and what is not queuing? So it's a massive difference from constructing experiments, asking people to describe. It's really looking at the lived experience that makes something ethnography. I'm going to highlight this quote here from Willis and Trondman and do it in various parts. First of all, it is a family of methods. There is no single way of doing ethnography. There are lots of different ways that together make up ethnography. But one of the core ones is that it involves direct and sustained social contact with agents. Agents is just a fancy, politically correct way of saying people. So we're spending time with people. This is really important though, and of richly writing up the encounter, respecting and recording. And ethnography can be the description of a whole study, or it can actually just be the description of the write-up, the finished product. And ethnography, and other speakers are going to talk about this later on today, really consists of three parts: the fieldwork, the analysis, and the writing up of that process. Representing at least partly in its own terms. Emic is the phrase we use for something that is within a community. Etic is the phrase we use when it's looking from outside in. And a good ethnography is going to express the findings at least partly in terms of the people who have been observed, who have participated in the study. And it talks about the irreducibility of the human beings. We cannot define all of this. It is not a set of numbers. It's not a closed finding. It's an observation of what went on and a description of one way of looking at what went on. Hammersley and Atkinson have a nice section where they describe 5 things that the typical ethnography includes, and I've paraphrased them here. First of all, there's field research. Most ethnography involves going out in the field, often for months, sometimes for years, and spending time with people. That's one of the classic sides of an ethnography. It involves participant observation and it involves informal discussions. There are some others. Sometimes we're looking at remote techniques and covert techniques. There is lots and lots of collecting of artifacts and symbols. There is video and photograph. But the core things that are typical: participant observation and informal discussions. The data collection is unstructured, and in ethnography, data refers to all of the things we collect. They can be photographs, they can be songs, they can be books, they can be long transcripts of conversations. All of these are data, sometimes called artifacts. We typically work with very small numbers of cases: 4 or 5 people, 8 families, 15 couples, 1 school class for 2 years, 1 loading dock in 1 factory for 3 months. So it's a small number of cases simply because of the logistics that are involved in doing the project. And the result is an explication. It's not just an explanation, it's an explication. It's a narrative that unfolds the experience of the ethnographer in a way that is going to be useful to the audience, the reader of that ethnography, in understanding what is going on. But we know that when we make an explication, it's not the only way of narrating that story. It is a useful, we hope, way of understanding the story, but it's not the only way of understanding it. This is adapted from Juncker and Gold, and it really reflects the different sorts of roles that the ethnographer can play. At the 2 ends of the spectrum, we have the complete observer, somebody who is not apparent to the people being watched, So this might be some forms of looking online, some forms of video camera work, fly on the wall stuff, some sort of streets observation. At the other end we have the complete participation, where somebody is undercover. The people around do not know what's going on. Both of those are covert, and both of those raise real issues for market researchers. The vast majority of work, some would argue the only valid work, is the participant observer or the observer participant. So let's look at this now in terms of why we do different sorts of ethnography. I'm going to use a Johari window here to express that. The first dimension of the Johari window is the traditional one, so things that are known to ourselves and things that are unknown to ourselves. I'm going to modify the second dimension slightly, things that we would be willing to share with other people and things that we're unwilling to share. And then I'm going to populate that Johari window. So here's a project by Tim Enser, an academic, well-written up project. He spent several months hanging around the Taj Mahal, talking to people who were there on holiday, people working there, people going on pilgrimages from different backgrounds, trying to understand how people consume cultural products. He was understanding the way that people walk and stare and gaze around the Taj Mahal. Now, people were very willing to talk to him. They were mostly on a holiday or on a high buzz because they were going somewhere, but they didn't really understand the mechanics and the drivers and what caused them to spend more time here and spend time there. But they were very happy to share their conversations and their thoughts and be observed by Tim, and he was able to draw together that ethnography. Here's another one by Leslie Salzinger, and she spent several periods of time, several months each time, working in factories in Mexico, understanding the role of sexuality and sexism in providing a hierarchy that improved the productivity of these factories. Now, the people there didn't understand it, neither the work people that she was with, the women she was working on the production line, nor really the people organizing it. They were going through various roles and rituals that led to higher productivity, that led to some objectification. If they hadn't understood it, they probably would have been unwilling to share that information. It didn't really show anybody in a great light, and it certainly wasn't good for the multinational companies who were running it. So this was research where we were finding out things that Sajid was finding out things that people were unwilling to share and unknown to themselves. Jason Disson was an even more interesting case. He went undercover with bread salesmen from a bakery, and they were involved in pilfering and fraud and theft. Now, they were actually quite knowledgeable about what they were doing. They could tell which sorts of new people they thought they could trust and who they could offer a bribe to and who they could bring into their scams and who they should avoid. But they were very unwilling to share it. That's why it was undercover research and why the outcomes were not very good for those people when the research was finally published. And in that top box we have things we know about ourselves and things we're willing to share. Well, a lot of regular market research, a lot of regular research can go in that box, but also we can see autoethnography, where we ask people to do ethnography about themselves. Autobiographies are a form of study here. Diaries are a study here. Experiential blogs. There was a very famous one a few years ago in the UK where a sex worker blogged about it, La Belle de Jour, and eventually it became a series of books and a TV series. Mass observation from the 30s through to the 60s in the UK was another example of people writing things down and send them to a central repository. More recently, we're seeing research moving into this zone. What else do we need to think about in terms of ethnography? Well, the first is that it's situated. I spent my time last summer looking at 3 different Starbucks in Nottingham, spending time in them during the working day. At one extreme, I have to take the view that what I saw there represented queuing behavior in those 3 Starbucks that year at that time. I need to be very careful about how much I can extend that. How do I go about extending it? Well, first of all, I see some common patterns between the 3, and I start to think, well, maybe those will exist elsewhere. I look at the literature, and there is plenty of literature on queuing behavior, and we can look at literature of studies within the UK and beyond to say, well, I saw that behavior and I saw that behavior, so that suggests that that's a common feature. I'm triangulating from other information, and I'm building on other people's research. Equally, I saw some things that were different, and so I start to say, well, maybe those are specific to Starbucks, but maybe they're specific to Starbucks in Nottingham on that occasion. I need to really be focused on this issue about ethnography is situated. Reflexivity, my choice of locations, the mindset I bring, my attitudes, they're all history. I bring them with me when I go into the field, when I start to make my observations. I need to be aware that the eyes I am looking with, the ears that I am listening with, are a product of my culture and of my time and of my background. So I bear that in mind. Reflexivity has got something else, however, that's also really important. I will have an impact on people. Maybe if I'd not been there, that Starbucks would have been empty and people would have queued differently. Maybe I'd taken somebody's preferred seat. Maybe I'm taking too long in the queue in front of them and they're thinking about changing their behavior. So it's not that I'm some sort of neutral person behind a window having no impact. In ethnography, we always have to be aware that there is an impact of the ethnographer being in the situation. And we call all of this reflexivity. We need to build it into our analysis and into our thinking. That's why we get this lovely quote here from Denzin. Ethnography is that form of inquiry and writing that produces descriptions, accounts about the ways of life the writer and those written about. He's putting that right at the front there, that we need to take on board, that when we do an ethnography, we are writing about ourselves and the people we have seen and the lived experience we have observed. Now, there are other types of ethnography, which I haven't got time to go into, but I'm going to cover very quickly. There's netnography, where you're looking at people online and you're engaging ethnography. If you want to understand this, I really urge you to read Robert Kozinet's book. It's a great read, invaluable if you want to go into this area. The advent of the video camera changed an awful lot of things about ethnography. All of a sudden we could capture more compelling data, and if you had the skill, and you're going to hear about this from Nick in a few moments, then you could create some really compelling explications of your findings through the use of video. Of course, we're all about market research, and we do that for the money. And really, and the cheesy icon on the left there is all about how this is a slippery slope. There is some market research ethnography which is absolutely great. It's good, it's immersive, it's in-depth. You will find that people are representing the voices of the participants they're studying with. At the other end of the spectrum, you'll see a lot of market research which I would say is loosely inspired by ethnography. There isn't a problem with that. There is all the reason in the world to enrich normal market research by taking things that we can learn from the ethnographic sort of way of doing things, of taking artifacts, of pulling them together, provided we don't say, and there was a lovely comment on one of the blogs recently, 2 hours of video does not make it an ethnography. 2 hours of video might be an interesting piece of ethnographical data, but the ethnography is collecting the right information, it's doing the right analysis, and it's writing up the right study about the lived experience. So with that, I'd like to throw the session open to questions, and I look forward to hopefully answering some of them. Thank you very much.